Alright, Simpson Drivetrain. The arrangement combines two multiple disc clutch and two brake bands overrunning clutch, two planetary gears operating with a common sum with a gear with a Simpson Drivetrain, and stand with virtually all 3-speed automatic transmissions that are currently produced. And it shows a power flow chart with a range gear, front clutch, rear clutch, knock band, kickback band, kick down low, reverse band, overrunning clutch, neutral, reverse neutral drive, second gear and low. Operation: Simpson Drivetrain provided 3 forward speeds, reverse neutral. Power flow is outlined in the above chart and following text. Figure 18, power flow neutral, engine input shaft. Then it shows the no output shaft. Neutral, the gear shift lever is placed with the neutral clutch with the brake band with the leaf of the input shaft. Rotate with the really no torque is transmitted to the output shaft. Drive low, the gear shift lever is placed in drive. The automatic transmission will be in low gear when the vehicle is a speed range gear with approximately 8 miles per hour with the drive low with the rear clutch with the gauge locking into the input shift of the internal gear with the front planetary gear set. Power flow through the drivetrain is followed from the input shaft with the internal gear with the front planetary gear set from the internal gear with the pinions with the front planetary gear set. Because of the front planetary carrier is locked to the output shaft that cannot rotate backwards and therefore reactionary member that recover the planetary pinions to drive sun gear which come to the bolt with the planetary gear set with the drive with the rear of the planetary pinion with the rear planetary carrier which is locked with the transmission case by overrunning clutch over the reactionary. Remember, the rear planetary pinion would therefore drive the rear planetary internal gear with the attached output speed of the reduction ratio approximately 2.45 to 1. Drive second with the gear shift lever to drive with the vehicle with approximately 8 to 20 miles an hour transmission normally with the second gear rear clutch with applied without input with shaft with the gear internal gear with the front planetary gear set with the front brake band is engaged locking with the sun gear stationary power flow through the drivetrain is followed from the input shaft of the internal gear with the front planetary gear set from the internal gear with the pinion of the front planetary gear set with the cover with the sun gear is locked with its axis with the reactionary. Remember the cover with the planetary pinion with the walk around with the rotate with the front planetary carrier the drive with the attached output shaft. Figure 19 show the power flow with the drive position directly input shaft 1.0 front clutch engaged rear clutch engaged output shaft drive gear shaft level of the drive of the vehicle with a speed of approximately above 20 miles an hour with the transmission the automatic transmission normally direct drive with the direct drive front rear clutch applied with the ultimate result of locking with the internal gear with the front planetary gear set. Result of the planetary gear is being locked in the whole planetary gear set with attached to the output shaft with a 1-to-1 speed ratio with the input shaft. The low with the gear shift level with the place and low with the power low. Flow with the drivetrain is identical with the low with the direct drive low with the described above. The only difference is the rear with the back band rear brake band rather than the overrunning clutch over the locking with the clear carrier rear planetary gear set. Because of the rear brake band prevent with the element of the rotating either direction. Drivetrain is able to provide with the engine braking clearing during vehicle. The deceleration with the transmission low with the contrast with the drive low with the vehicle with the free wheel during deceleration due to the one-way locking with the overrunning clutch. Figure 20 show the power flow with the reverse input shaft 2.20 front line clutch engaged low and reverse van applied overrunning clutch and effective 1.0 drive output shaft. Reverse the gear shift level, the reverse the front clutch is applied locking of the sun gear with the input shaft with the rear brake band is applied with holding the carrier with the rear planetary gear stationary with the power flow through the drivetrain is followed with the input shaft with the sun gear with the front sun gear with the rear planetary pinions with the rear planetary carrier is with the stationary as active the reactionary member and the rear planetary pinion with therefore drive with the internal gear with the planetary gear set with the attached output shaft with the reverse direction input shaft speed reduction ratio of approximately 2.2 to 1. Lesson 3, describe the hydraulic system of the automatic transmission. Purpose of the hydraulic pressure for the hydraulic slave to circulate the actuate planetary holding device with the clutch and brake bands. The hydraulic system control of the shifting of the pattern of the transmission. This is done by the switching of the hydraulic pressure program combination of the planetary holding devices based on the vehicle speed, engine load. The indicator of the hydraulic system circulates oil through the remote cooler with the remote excess heat with the generator with the transmission torque converter with the hydraulic system provided with the constant flush of the supply with the oil critical and wearing surfaces of the transmission. Figure 21 show the typical hydraulic system from the pump to the screen to the pump cover the oil flow of the system and it's driven by the engines to the screen, then through the regulated line pressure, the torque converter pressure regulator valve line pressure applied with the during the forced downshift to cover the overall increase of the line pressure applied with during the reverse application cover the overall increase of the pressure line pressure feedback operate regulator valve with the regulated line with the pressure transmission hydraulic pressure excessive pressure return to the suction side of the pump. Filter strain keeps dirt for the entire hydraulic system and the oil sump transmission oil. The supply system provided the oil, clean pressure regulated supply over the oil hydraulic system over the automatic transmission. Earlier automatic transmission used the combination of the engine-driven pump that could work with the conjunction output shaft-driven pump with the configuration no longer used, therefore will not be covered with the operation construction of a typical system and is described below. Figure 22 shows the typical transmission hydraulic pump, oil seal O-ring, oil pump body gasket, outer rotor, inner rotor, rear section, reaction shaft, support, and bolt and seal rings and thrust washers selected. Hydraulic pump. The typical hydraulic pump is usually the standard type of the internal external with the rotor type of the pump, with the internal external gear type pump is usually located with the front of the transmission cable, the key with the torque converter with the hub is over the driven with the engine, oil sump with the filter, oil sump usually with the form of the tree with the metal pan with attached with the bottom of the transmission cable, the pump draw the oil through from the sump through a strain with a strainer usually made of paper or metal. Regulator valve with the regulator valve control the pressure for the hydraulic pump, the hydraulic system of the transmission, receive with the constant working pressure for the pressure supply with the receive of the hydraulic system, with called the line pressure for the pump, pressure for the fed of the hydraulic system through the spool valve. The spool is held in the right calibrated spring in the position with the spool with the clove of the port, the valve with the pump pressure for the feedback of the pump section line. After the pump pressure relief of the spool valve, the portion of the feedback end with the spool valve with the opposite to the spring with the pump pressure for the spring signal attempts to move the spool against the spring pressure. A pump pressure overcomes the spring with the pressure of the spool is pushed to the left, though, uncovering the pump of the section feedback port with the pump pressure with the let off through the port, causing the line pressure drop. Line pressure drop allowed with the spring to the clove of the bleed port, which in turn allowed with the pumping pressure to build again with the from the one regulation of the line pressure in the constant cycle with the pump of the spring pressure of the operating with the spool valve. The valve that described as balance type of the spool valve. The balance type spool valves are very common in transmission hydraulic systems. Modulated of the regulator valve after the pump pressure through the regulator valve becomes regulated line with the operating with the however the automatic transmission needs more than one set line pressure to accomplish additional signals are fed with the regulator modulated with line pressure. Special purpose of the valve with the consideration most common of the modulation of the line pressure under normal conditions. The regulator valve functions unmodulated mode is described in this previous paragraph. Normal line pressure is sufficient to operate the transmission still and to maintain smoothing and shifting quality. During period of the heavy acceleration, additional line pressure with the required with the hold with the clutch of the brake with the band with the tight enough to transmit and increase the engine torque. With this is particularly important during the initial application of the elements during the shifting chain with the minimized slippages during the engagement with would cover the burning of the pre-temp, ensure wearing of the friction faction. Operating in the reverse places, operating in reverse places, additional torque requirements for the clutch and brake band hold for the element with the planetary gear set for the reason of the line pressure for the increase of the least for the twofold during the operation in reverse. Any condition of the cover of the drop below line pressure will cover the regulator valve with a temporary cut the oil supply with the torque converter with the common air current with the condition with the shifting with the reverse for the temporary increase of the requirements based on placed on the pump of the engine idling with the pump turning slowly. Modulation is the line pressure for earlier with a similar manner with the pressure signal fed back with the regulator valve. The spring and the result of it with the line pressure will must increase to overcome the high pressure before the suction feedback with the port and is uncovered. Feedback signal is coming with the manual valve and throttle modulation system. Figure 23 show the typical torque converter circuit. Show the let's start with the control valve of the oil circulate through the cooler. After leave the torque valve, pressure oil supply enters the torque converter to the cooler. Pressure feedback fed into the operator with the control valve, and then the cooler goes to the after it leaves the cooler. And you with the lubrication before it drains and back to sump. The shade is black. The white is cooled oil. Alright, your torque converter supply and cooling lubrication tasks are all hauled by converter feed circuit of the hydraulic system. Integration with the local logical one with the following region with all feed with the circuit will function approximately with the same operating pressure range, but the majority of the heat generated with the transmission originates in the torque converter. Therefore, logically, with the oil that all accelerates through the torque converter should path directly with the cooler. The arrangement effectively isolated with the transmission with a major heat source. Major region of lubrication with the transmission is to cool out a localized area with the heat with the generated between the moving part of the retrieve. The transmission lubrication is handled by the oil after it's passed through the cooler. Oil supply. The supply with the oil with the converter feed circuit with the pass with the regulator valve. The regulator valve will cut off the oil supply with the line pressure drops below the operating minimum under the normal conditions. Circumstance however the oil pressure cut off will last no more than a few seconds will not affect the transmission operation during the period of the engine shutdown with the regulator valve also prevent the torque converter over the drain back of the oil sump with the condition of therefore otherwise the would require the pump to refill the converter at each of the engine restart with the creating unacceptable delay in operation. Regulation of circuit oil pressure for the regulator valve with the supply with the converter feed circuit with the regulated line pressure for the converter feed circuit with the however the required with the constant pressure for the independent with the transmission operating mode with the generally lower line pressure. The converter control valve with the pressure of the converter feed, circle of the converter for control valve with the balance type spool valve with the voice operating transmittal as much line over the regulator valve with the operating pressure low calibrated spring push of the spool to the left, the operating of the delivery port with the pressure reaching the desired level of the spool to the fourth to the right, blocking the delivery port with the meter or the orifice usually provided with the between the torque and the converter oil control the cooler with the control of the volume and this oil with the flow through the system. Oil from the flow through the torque converter. Oil flow through the converter is most cases the ice valve of the oil capacity of the converter control valve and the torque of the converter. The internal drill passes in the transmission case. The oil enters the torque converter through the clearance between the outside of the stator support with the inside of the converter hub. After the oil circulate of the converter exists for the clearance between the input shaft and the inside of the stator support shaft. The oil then passes through the internally drilled passages into the oil cooler output. The cooler is a heat exchange with locally remotely from the transmission following most of the popular configuration. The most popular transmission cooler used with the light vehicle with the integral with the engine radiator. The cooler is basically applied with extend with the entire length of the inside the outlet tank of the radiator. The oil passes through the cooler portion of the latent heat with the transfer of the engine coolant with the oil return with the transmission should be no mixing of the physical contact between the engine coolant with the transmission oil. In heavy-duty use of the separator of the oil and air type of the cooler is preferred with the beach cover. The server the use enough of the high heat generated by the transmission actually cover the engine when they overheat with the transmission. The heat transferred directly to the engine coolant. The oil, the air type of the heat with the exchange with the built with the much same with the automotive radiator. Consists of a continuous tubing arranged with the rows of the tubing passing for the series of fins of the oil packed through the tube and the heat with the transfer from the air V with the conducting through the fin of the type of the cooler usually located at the front of the engine radiator. Whereas the subject to airflow of this condition is important to the efficient operation. Lubrication. After the oil is passed through the oil cooler is piped with the internal passage of the transmission to cave the section of the transmission where it provides lubrication with the components charged for the planetary gears output shaft gears and the oil the drain for the back end of the sump. But at this time should be noted that the oil sump also dissipates the heat from the transmission oil with the concern with the to be source of the transmission cooling. Your range control system. The range control system provided by the automatic operator with the control of the shifting of the transmission. Shifting of the transmission is controlled by the following two indicators. Manual selection. The position of the gear shifter level to show the operator shift with the drive. The shifting of the program and the selection available to the operator with the typical 2-speed unit of the neutral with the end of the engine freewheel with the providing no driven forward with the vehicle with the drive D with the transmission and provided with the automatic shifting through low to high gear range of the drive L with the drive low and the transmission allowed with the low range with no automatic shifting occurs. Reverse R direction of the engine torque with the drive wheel with the vehicle driven backwards. P for park is the same with the natural except with the driven wheels are locked in positive latching device and within the transmission 3-speed transmissions has also above selecting plus for the drive second position also left 4 an automatic shift from the first to second gear with butt blocks and automatic shift from second to third gear. Vehicle speed versus engine loading. Shifting of the automatic transmission control with the 2-pressure signal with the air indicator of the speed of the engine loading. The signal will work again for each of the produce the shifting sequence. Figure 224 shows the schematic with a typical 3-speed automatic transmission. And I'm not going to go over that. The center of all the shifters control with the valve body of the unit, which can be thought with the hydraulic beam to receive the information indicated with the describe the blood base of the information valve body. Switch with the line pressure with the proper planetary holding elements for the rear acquired gear range after the information chain with the valve body chain with its line pressure output accordingly for the signal with the simplicity of the 2-speed with the transmission will be used to explain with the operation of the typical component of the hypothetical automatic transmission. Hydraulic system will be constructed with a paragraph that must be struck with a hypothetical system. No means but contained with all the way for the necessary real transmission. If useful for the sake of learning because of the clarity, illustrates how the discussion and action when the shifting is initiated. Manual valve with the manual valve divides select with the desired shifting program through the position of the gear shifter level. The manual valve is basically a multi-pore spool. Valve switch line pressure and select the passage as it is moved through the positions. If the governor modulates with the line pressure produced with the signal A with the indicating the vehicle speed, the signal U with the valve body to formulate with the gear range selection with the transmission, the governor U with the spool valve with the operating with the central figure operated weight, the weights of the rotate with the output shaft with the transmission become the solidly linked to the driven wheel, therefore constantly provide with the true indication of the vehicle speed that is weight rotate with the acted on the central figure forward for the 10 minutes to pull them and outward with the axis rotation. When the weights are pulled inward, especially calibrated spring with the allow with the weight of the move with the fully reacted with the fully extended with the position within desired output shaft with the speed range, spool valve with the position where on all line pressure is blocked with the governor weights for the fully retracted the weight for the move outward with the spool valve with gradually opens with the line pressure port over the governor pressure port with the result of the approximate linear speed with the governor pressure increases. The shift valve with the simply balanced type of the spool with the valve with the selection between low and high gear with the manual with the valve with the drive with the position. Governor pressure act with the spool valve with the one direction drive with the push with the spool over the higher gear position, and at the same time the spring pressure modulate with the position of the accelerator pedal with the drive to push the spool toward the lower gear position. The decision to shift the valve depending on which the pressure of the gear with the governor over or the throttle. The shift valve will also contain the device down with the throttle plug. The full throttle with the throttle plug makes a physical contact with the shift valve of the spool forcing it into the lower gear position. This is how the force of the downshifting passing gear is initiated. Operation. The following subparagraph describe the operation of hypothetical hydraulic system, two-speed automatic transmission, all of its over the operation of the various reverser band rather than a reverser clutch is even the hypothetical transmission when the shifter level is placed in neutral line pressure with the block of the manual valve and over the friction elements are applied. When the shifter level is placed in drive low over the manual valve delivers the line pressure directly with the low band with the compound planetary gear train with low gear. When the gear shifter is placed in the reverse, the manual level delivers the line pressure directly to the reverse band with the compound planetary gear, then in low gear, and it's low gear. When the gear shifter is placed within the drive of the manual valve, delivers the line pressure directly to the low band into the governor plate by cover the vehicle is moving and the governor does not supply with the pressure to shift valve with the compound planetary gear train remains in low gear. If the vehicle begins with the move of the gear shifter to the driven of the transmission lower gear with the drive of the engine necessary mechanical advantage to accelerate the vehicle to the speed increase with the governor pressure provided proportionally with the vehicle speed reaching the point with the governor pressure on one side with the shifting valve spool can overcome the throttle spring with the pressure for the other side with the shifting valve spool with the spool move directly to the high gear position of the valve spool move with the shifting valve at the beginning with the delivery line pressure for the apply with the direct clutch for the release low band so that release while under the applying the pressure with the double acting servo load. The double acting servo load can be relieved with applying pressure under the position of the diameter of the piston with the bore of the double acting servo load step to so that the pressure under the piston will act on the greater surface of the area with therefore overcoming all the pressure application of the direct clutch relief of the lower band place compound planetary gear train high gear direct drive with the pressure exerted with the throttle speed spring against the shifting valve spool with increasing proportional accelerated to press the turn will proportionally rate with the vehicle speed with the automatic upshifting occurs. If a situation arrives with a quick acceleration need with the operator initiate with the fourth downshift with the pushing the accelerator to the floor, the action comes with the throttle plug to contact with the shift valve spool forcing it in the low gear position. The action cuts off with the line with the pressure for the direct clutch and the release of the side with the low band servo to cover the direct clutch to relieve the low band apply with the low place of the compound planetary gear in low gear. Auxiliary devices. The hypothetical hydraulic system mentioned with above is a good learning tool. However, the actual function made in the more the device is necessary of the following. The device is necessary in addition to the basic operation of the hydraulic system. The device is called the accumulator for the connected with the pressure for the supply line selected with the planetary gear set holding elements for the accumulator spring load with the system cover the line pressure to build gradually when the elements supply with the given the cushioning the effect with the application resulting in a smoother shifting in the transmission. Valves are installed to prevent the transmission from being shifted in the reverse during the forward movement to prevent the forward downshift above the predetermined speed of modulator. Even some of the automatic transmission play with the throttle linkage of the modulator of the diaphragm device. Use the engine manifold vacuum to indicate the engine load to the shift level. Lesson 5: Fundamental of the transfer cases.